prepare to reflect on these readings and homilies, priests and deacons go to many sources. And the source I've decided to go to is really a wonderful theologian, had the potential to be a great theologian, by the name of Sherlock Holmes. Now the reason, I'm teasing, but the reason I bring this up is that if you're a fan of Sherlock Holmes like I am, of the actual stories and books, if you've read them at all, you know that there's a line that is featured at least once in every story and in every one of the 4 novels and 56 short stories. It's repeated at least once every time. And it's Sherlock frustrated with John Watson, and he turns to him and he says, "You see, Watson, but you do not observe. You see, but you do not observe." I thought about that a lot this week, thinking about the feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. How often in our lives, just look around this church, we are surrounded by crosses. Surrounded. I almost grabbed that cross to bring with me. I thought, no, they're going to think he's trying to be like the Pope. But we came in to church tonight following the cross. The church itself, as churches have been for millennia now, formed in the shape of a cross. We have already repeatedly made signs of the cross, not just welcoming Lacey Elizabeth, but ourselves, 3 times over the gospel itself. We see, but so often we do not observe. That word observe is so interesting because it means being able to not only see with the faculty of sight, but to understand, to put things together. The original Latin meaning of that root was to guard. I'm going to look out and I'm going to take action based on what I see. I'm going to guard. I'm going to act. So as we observe and not just see the cross, what is it that we observe? We observe what St. Paul tells us in the second reading, that our God has so loved us that our God has emptied himself into our lives, even to the point of dying on a cross. And he does that to draw us all into the very life of God. What's a very interesting word in that section from Philippians, because it says, even on the death on the cross, therefore, because Christ did that, God has exalted him and given him a name above all other names. So Christ has emptied himself and then been exalted. We, from the moment of our baptism, as we just experienced, are marked with that sign of the cross. We commit ourselves to following Christ and doing what Christ did. And what is it we observe that Christ has done? Christ has poured himself out for everyone else. There's an important verse that we didn't read tonight. It's the verse from St. Paul that comes just before the section we did read. Paul is in prison, and he's writing to the church at Philippi. And he says, I want you, if you would make me happy as I face death, if you would give me peace and happiness, it would be if you all treat each other as Christ did. Put everyone else's needs ahead of your own. Treat everyone else as more important than yourself. Put on the mind of Christ, who? And then we go on with the section we read. How are we doing that in our lives? Do we observe the impact of the cross in our own life? We know, for example, in a few moments as we enter into the Eucharist, that we look beyond the forms of bread and wine. We see bread and wine, but we observe the body and blood of Christ. In our own lives, in our day-to-day lives, not just when we come here to church, do we also look beyond what we see? Or are we like John Watson? We see, but we do not observe. What is the impact of what we have seen? What does it mean? Are we willing in our own families, in our workplace, in school, are we willing to put our own needs last and to see everyone else as more important than ourselves? Are we? Is that what we observe in society? Is that what we see in the world around us? The sign of the cross is a powerful, powerful sign. I used to say this before, and now in contemporary life we say it again. In the early days of the church, it took an act of great courage to publicly make the sign of the cross. It wasn't just some automatic thing we make before a football game or some other way where we're not really thinking about it. Or we make the sign of the cross when we come into the church and we don't even think about it. But in the early days of the church, that could cost you your life. And in many parts of the world today, it still can cost you your life to publicly proclaim that you are Christ's. This coming week, maybe we could reflect on this some more. In my life, how often am I reduced to seeing but not observing the impact of God's action to empty himself onto a cross for us, so that together we can all be exalted in heaven? We see, but we don't always observe.